Okay, welcome. This is going to be the notes on page 64. So we are subtracting decimals. We've already reviewed the rules for same and different sign addition. We've talked about how subtraction is really just adding the opposites. So when we think of it that way, we can make subtraction a lot easier. And we have reviewed what to do when we are adding and subtracting decimals. To kind of recap those big pieces here, the first thing that you need to remember about decimals is to line up the decimal point. That keeps all of our place values in a line. So ones with ones, tenths with tenths, hundredths with hundredths, etc. So we do need to remember to line up those decimal points. That's the key for decimals. But the other thing that we need to remember about subtraction specifically is that when you see a double negative, we are going to make that into a positive, okay? If you are subtracting a negative number, you are getting less negative, and that's the same as saying more positive. So anytime we see those negative signs right next to each other, we're just gonna go whoop, 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 and make it into a big positive sign. So here on this first example, we've got 4 and 5 tenths minus negative 3 and 16 hundredths. I see my double negatives. I'm going to turn it into a big positive. Okay. Subtraction is just adding the opposite. So for subtracting a negative, we're adding a positive. There's our big plus sign. If I go to add these now, I want to think about my direction arrows. I have a positive number and a positive number. So this is just basic addition. Same signs, combine. We're going to line up our decimal points. Before we even write any numbers, I like to write them all the way straight down through. And now I'm just going to go ahead and fill in my addition problem. 4 and 5 tenths, 3 and 16 hundredths. I'm going to pause here because I noticed that I have an empty place value and it's looking a little lopsided. So I'm going to fill that in with our ghost 0 or our placeholder 0 to show that there's nothing there. Okay, so now we can go ahead and add. 0 plus 6 is 6. 5 plus 1 is 6. 4 plus 3 is 7. So we have 7 and 66 hundredths. The very last thing I'm going to think about is what should my sign in my answer be? So you think about signs first, you think about signs last. It's like a little sandwich in your brain. Okay, all of the math is happening in here, but you think of signs first, you think of signs last. Sandwich it in. I have a positive and a positive with same signs. You keep your answer the same. So it's going to be a positive answer, 7 and 66 hundredths. Okay, let's take a pause here and go ahead and try number 1. And let's see if we got it correct. Make sure you're double checking your work. I again see 6.25 minus a negative 12.4. I see a double negative, so I'm going to make it into one big positive. I'm going to line up my decimal points and identify whether or not I'm adding or subtracting these values. Okay, we have a positive and another positive, so same signs combine. We're going to add these all together. Bloop, bloop. I've got 6 and 25 hundredths. Oof, I'm getting small on space there. I've got 12 and 4 tenths. Notice how when I wrote that 4, I put it right next to the decimal point. Okay, a lot of times we'll just try to like throw it towards the end, but you need to keep them exactly where they are. The 2 is immediately to the left of the decimal point. The 4 is immediately to the right, meaning I do have an empty place value in here I got to do something with. So let's throw ghost 0 down and we're ready to rock and roll. 5 plus 0 is 5. 2 plus 4 is 6. 6 plus 2 is 8. And we just bring down that 1. If you wanted to throw ghost 0 up there, you could have. 0 plus 1 is 1. Okay. Remember your little sandwich. Last thing we're thinking about is our signs. I had a positive, so my answer stays positive. Okay. How do you know if your answer is going to be positive or negative? We just did a same sign addition problem in both of these cases. So when they have the same sign, how do you know what your answer is going to be? Hopefully you said that if it's the same sign, you keep the sign from the problem. So if it's negative, it's going to be negative. If it's positive, your answer is going to be positive. Okay, let's look at what happens when we have different signs. Okay, this one, number 2, gets a little bit trickier. So instead of a positive, we're starting out with a negative, -2 and 36 hundredths. And then again, we're subtracting another negative 113 and 2 tenths. I'm going to think about my signs first. I see 2 negatives. Double negatives make a big positive. So that helps me out, make it a little simpler. And I'm going to think about my signs now. I'm going to follow what rule? Same sign or different sign? I've got a negative value. I've got a positive value. These are different directions, so we are going to cancel out positives and negatives, so we're going to subtract. Okay? You need to put the bigger number first. Remember, with different signs, when you start to subtract, it's going to be big minus small. So I have about 2 here. I have 113-ish here. So this is obviously going to be my bigger number. We're going to put that one on top. I'm going to do it over here. Line up those decimal points. Whoop. I have 113 and 2 tenths. I've got 2 right next to my decimal point. On the other side, I've got 36 hundredths. If I take a little pause here, I see again, I have an empty place value I've got to fill in. Doot, doot, doot. Again, you could fill them in here as well if you wanted to. And remember, we are subtracting this time because it's different signs, so I'm going to subtract. I cannot take 6 away from 0. If I have nothing, there's no 6 to pull from. So I'm going to regroup. I'm going to borrow from the 2, and I'm going to make it a 1. And now my 0 becomes 10. 10 minus 6 is 4. I run into the same problem when I move on to the next place value. I can't take 3 away from 1, so I'm going to regroup again. 3 becomes 2. That 1 now is going to become 11. 11 minus 3, 11, 10, 9, 8. We're good there. 2 minus 2 is 0. 1 minus 0 is 1. 1 minus 0 is 1. My decimal point looks a little high. Let me fix that there. Bloop, bloop. There we go. I have 110 and 84 hundredths. But don't forget your sandwich. We start thinking about signs. We end thinking about signs. What sign should I use? Because this is different sign, we're thinking about, well, what's going to be left over after we cancel out the 0 pairs. I have 2 negatives. I've got 113 positives. So 113 is definitely going to be my bigger value. It's positive, so I'm going to keep my answer positive. Okay, so with that example, when we have different signs or different directions, how do you know if your answer is going to be positive or negative? Hopefully, what you've figured out is that you use the bigger sign. If I don't have enough space, use the bigger sign. Okay, go ahead and try number 2. It is very similar to the one we just did. And let's double check our answer. You had negative 10 and 5 tenths minus negative 6 and 724 thousandths. Think about your signs first. We're starting that little sign sandwich. I see 2 double negatives, so I'm going to make it into one big positive. And now I'm just going to follow my normal addition rules. I've got a negative. I've got a positive. So different directions, we cancel out. This is going to be subtraction again, just like our example. Okay. Big minus small. So I need to think about which one's bigger. I like to just estimate here. This is about 10. So I got 10 negatives. This is about 6. So I got 6 positives. 10 is going to be my bigger value. So when I line up these decimal points to subtract, loop, I'm going to put 10.5 on top and 6.724 on the bottom. Oops, sorry. If I'm looking at this, it seems a little lopsided, so I'm going to fill in my ghost zeros for both of these place values here. Maybe I want to throw in a ghost value there as well. Okay, we are ready to subtract. Figure out what's left over when these cancel out. I'm going to need to regroup. I can't take 4 away from 0, so I'm going to look to its neighbor. Nobody's home. I cannot borrow from this neighbor, so I got to go one more. But when I borrow from this 5 and I make it 4, this neighbor, they're very finicky. They only want to share to the neighbor directly next to them. So I can only make that value a 10. That doesn't really help me here. Okay, I still don't have anything to take away from. But now there is 10 in my place value next to us. So I'm going to borrow again. 10 is going to become 9. And now I have 10 in that first place value. 10 minus 4 is 6. 9 minus 2 is 7. 4 minus 7, I have 4. I can't take 7 away, so I'm going to have to regroup again. I can regroup over the place value, so I could borrow from this 10. Now, you might say like, oh, I can't borrow from that 0, so I'm going to come over here. I would just look at this as 10, okay? Because you could regroup twice, you're going to get the same event. 10 is going to become 9, okay? And I'm going to regroup over to the place value I needed. 14 minus 7 is 7. 9 minus that 6 is 3. Now you could be thinking we're done, but remember we've only done the one piece of bread on our sandwich. We need to do the other. Think of signs first, think of signs last. What sign am I going to use in my answer? We've already established that different signs, you are going to use the bigger sign. We said negative 10.5 is the bigger value here, so our answer should be negative. That's a big mistake I saw on the quiz, was we just forgot to go back and put our sign in our answers. Don't forget your sandwich. Negative 3 and 776 thousandths. Okay, last one here. We're going to look at the example on number 3. So this one is noticeably different. It looks a lot cleaner, a lot simpler, because we're not subtracting a negative like we did up here. This is just a positive minus a positive. However, this is essentially, if we're estimating, 2 minus 7. Okay, so we're taking a bigger value than we have away. If we estimate 2 minus 7, we could think back and just count. So 2, 1, 0, negative 1, negative 2, negative 3, negative 4, negative 5. So our answers should be around negative 5. That might help us just double check that we're right. Okay, but what's going to happen here is we need to figure out, well, which direction am I moving? Okay, what I like to do when we just have nice, clean positive minus a bigger positive is I like to kind of think of this second number. When we see a subtracting of a positive, you can think of it like a negative. Subtracting positives move left, negatives also move left. So I like to circle it and look at it kind of like a negative. When I do that, I can see I've got a positive, and I can think of this like a negative. This one is moving left. So this becomes a different sign problem. Okay, essentially what we did, if we remember that subtraction is just adding the opposites, we're calling this 2.1 plus a negative 7.84. So those are different signs, different directions. We're going to subtract. Okay, don't forget that it's going to be big minus small. Our bigger value here, 2 or 7, while our bigger value is going to be that 7. So lining up my decimal points. Bloop, bloop, bloop. We're going to start with our bigger number on top, 7 and 84 hundredths. Notice it doesn't necessarily go in the order given. Okay, you do need to pay attention to what is your bigger value. Bigger values go on top. 7 and 84 hundredths, we are subtracting 2 and 1/10. Again, pay attention. That 1 is right next to the decimal point. Don't throw it into a place value it doesn't belong in. Okay, we have an empty place value, so I'm going to fill it with a 0, and I'm going to start subtracting. 4 minus 0 is 4. 8 minus 1 is 7. 7 minus 2 is 5. Okay. If we think about what was our bigger sign, we had more negatives than positives, so our answer should be negative. Negative 5 and 74 hundredths. If we compare it to our estimate, we said it should be about negative 5. We're pretty good. Okay. So when subtracting, does it matter which number you put on top? Explain. Yes, it should. We said it's going to be big minus small, okay? Because that's going to give us what is left over when we cancel out those zeros. So, for example, if we had 7 negatives and we only have 2 positives, these guys are going to cancel out. Well, that's the same as saying it's 7 minus 2. Okay, so it's got to be your big minus small. That gives us what's left over. Gives us what is left over after running out of space. 0 pairs are canceled out. Okay. Last little bit of this Edpuzzle, go ahead and try the final try these problems. We've got 1.52 minus 38.3. All right, starting off strong, we notice it's nice and clean. I'm going to think of this guy right here as a negative. So this is just going to be a positive plus that negative. We've got a positive sign. We've got a negative sign. They're different signs, so they're going to cancel out. We got to put our big minus small, so we're going to line up our decimal points. Bloop. Think about which one's bigger. This is about 1. This is about 38. So this guy here is going to be our bigger value. We're going to put 38 and 3/100 on top, 3/10 on top, 1 and 52/100 on the bottom. Unbalanced place value, we're going to throw in that 0, and we're going to now subtract. I can't take 2 away from nothing, so let's regroup. Goodness gracious, we were mean on these problems. 3 becomes 2. 0 becomes 10. 10 minus 2 now is 8. 2 minus 5, can't do it, so we're going to have to regroup again. Borrowing from my neighbor, 8 becomes 7. 2 becomes 12. 12 minus 5, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7. Looking at my next one, 7 minus 1 is 6. You could have put a 0 here or just bring that 3 down. 3 minus 0 is still 3. What is my sign in the end? Sandwich your signs. First and last thing you should think about. We said our negatives was the bigger value, so we're going to have negatives left over when they cancel out. Negative 36 and 7/8. Okay. Finish the practice on page 64 and 65 to get into the good habits of lining up decimal points, making double negatives into positives, and practicing those same sign, different sign addition rules again. If you need help, make sure you check in with your teacher or your partner and check your work with the book key if you're in my class at the end. Okay, good luck. Hope that was helpful.